The headline appeared before the truth even had a chance to breathe. It spread faster than any explanation could follow, faster than logic, faster than reason, faster than anything Jack or Tử Tiên could ever control, and by the time either of them understood what was happening, the world had already made up its mind. Jack's secret child exposed. DNA test proves Beau is not his son. The words burned on the screen. Cold, precise, cruel. Tử Tiên stared at the phone in her hand, her vision blurring for a second before snapping back into focus, as if her mind refused to accept what her eyes were seeing, as if reality itself had shifted without her consent, without warning, without mercy. "No," she whispered under her breath. Behind her, Beau laughed softly, chasing a ball across the yard, unaware that in that exact moment, his world was being torn apart by people who had never even met him. Jack walked in from outside, wiping his hands absent-mindedly, his expression calm, too calm for what was about to hit him. "What is it?" he asked. Tử Tiên didn't answer. She just handed him the phone. He took it, looked, and everything in him froze. For a second, there was no reaction, no anger, no denial, just stillness. Then, "This is fake," he said immediately, his voice low but firm, his eyes darkening as he scrolled quickly, taking in every detail, every fabricated document, every carefully edited piece of evidence laid out as if it had always been true. But it wasn't just a headline, it was a full story. Photos, old timelines twisted into new narratives, and worst of all, a DNA report, stamped, signed, convincing, almost perfect. Almost. Tử Tiên watched him carefully. "You're sure?" she asked. The question wasn't accusatory, but it wasn't blind either. Jack looked up at her, and for the first time, there was something in his expression that wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, something closer to disbelief. "I would know if I had another child," he said. That should have been enough. It should have. But something had already shifted, because this wasn't just about truth anymore. It was about perception, and perception was already turning against them. By the afternoon, the story had exploded. News outlets picked it up. Social media amplified it. Speculation turned into certainty. Poor Beau. So she lied all along? She trapped him with another man's child. The comments were relentless, merciless, and for the first time, the attack wasn't just on Jack. It was on her, on Beau, on everything she had built. Tử Tiên put her phone down slowly. Her hands were shaking, but her face remained still. Too still. Jack noticed. "Don't read it," he said, but she had already read enough. "This isn't just about you anymore," she said quietly. Jack clenched his jaw. "I know." Silence. Heavy. And then, the door opened. Without warning, Jack's mother stepped in. Elegant as always, composed, controlled. But her eyes were sharp, different. "What is this I'm seeing?" she asked, holding up her own phone. Neither of them answered immediately, because the answer wasn't simple. "It's fake," Jack said finally. "Someone is manipulating this." His mother didn't respond. She walked closer, placed her phone on the table. The same report, the same documents, printed, physical, real enough to touch. "I had this verified," she said calmly. The words hit like a shock. Jack frowned. "What do you mean verified?" "I sent it to someone I trust," she replied. "A private lab." The air shifted instantly. Tử Tien's breath caught. "And?" Jack asked. A pause, just long enough to break something. "They said, it's consistent." The room went silent. Completely. Utterly. Devastatingly. "That's impossible," Jack said, his voice tightening. "Is it?" his mother replied, her tone still calm, but colder now. "Because everything here suggests otherwise." Tử Tiên didn't move, didn't speak, didn't react, because something inside her had already begun to crack. "Say something," Jack said, turning to her. But she couldn't, because in that moment, it wasn't about believing strangers. It was about believing him. And for the first time, she hesitated. Jack saw it. That hesitation, that single second of doubt, and it hit harder than anything else. "You don't believe this," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a plea. Tu Tian swallowed. "I don't know what to believe right now," she said softly. And that was worse than rejection, because uncertainty creates distance. Jack stepped back slightly, running a hand through his hair, frustration and disbelief colliding inside him. "This is insane," he muttered. "Someone is setting me up." His mother crossed her arms. "Or the truth is finally coming out." Jack looked at her sharply. "You think I would do that?" he asked. "I think I don't know everything about you," she replied. Another blow, another crack. And this time, it didn't just hit him, it hit all of them. Outside, Beau's laughter faded as he ran closer to the house, sensing something was wrong even if he didn't understand it, his small face confused as he looked between the three adults standing in silence. "Mom?" he said. Tu Tian turned immediately. Her expression softened instantly as she knelt down, pulling him into her arms. "It's okay," she whispered. But her voice wasn't steady. Jack watched them, his chest tightening, because suddenly, everything felt like it was slipping, not because of what was true, but because of what people believed. And belief was already changing everything. That night, the house felt colder, quieter, more distant. Jack stood alone, staring at the same documents again, his mind racing, analyzing every detail, every flaw, every possibility, because he knew this wasn't real, but it was too perfect, too calculated, too intentional. "This isn't random," he said under his breath. Someone had planned this. Someone had known exactly what to create, exactly what to release, exactly how to make it believable, and that meant this wasn't just an attack, it was personal, very personal. Behind him, his mother stood in the doorway, watching, silent. "I need the truth," she said. Jack didn't turn. "I already told you the truth." She stepped closer. "Then prove it." The words lingered, sharp, demanding, and impossible. Because how do you prove something that never happened, when the world already believes it did? Across the room, Tu Tian stood alone by the window, Beau asleep in her arms, her eyes fixed on the darkness outside, her thoughts louder than anything else around her, her heart caught between love and doubt, between trust and fear, between everything she had lived and everything she was now being told. And for the first time, a question formed that she never thought she would ask again. What if she was wrong? And somewhere, hidden behind all of this chaos, behind the lies, behind the perfectly crafted evidence, someone was watching, waiting, because the truth hadn't been revealed yet. And when it did, it wouldn't just break trust, it would expose something much deeper, something closer, something inside the family itself. The silence didn't break the next morning. It deepened. It settled into the walls, into the spaces between words, into the way Tu Tian avoided Jack's eyes just a second too long, into the way his mother no longer asked questions, but observed, measured, calculated. Everything had changed, and nothing had been proven. Jack hadn't slept, not even for a minute. He sat in the dim light of the living room, the same documents spread across the table, his fingers tracing every line, every stamp, every detail, not because he believed them, but because he needed to understand how something so false could look so real. It was too clean, too perfect, too deliberate. "This wasn't just made," he muttered to himself. "It was built." Behind him, footsteps approached. He didn't need to turn. "Still trying to deny it?" His mother's voice came, calm but sharp. Jack exhaled slowly. "I'm trying to find who did this." "And you're sure it wasn't something you hid?" she asked. That made him turn. Finally. "You really think I would lie about something like this?" he said. "I think," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "that I trusted you before, and I was wrong about other things." That landed harder than any accusation, Because this time, she wasn't shouting, she wasn't angry, she was convinced. And that was worse. Across the room, Tử Tiên stood still, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold something together that was already falling apart, her eyes moving between them, but never fully resting on Jack. "I need air," she said suddenly. Neither of them stopped her, because neither of them knew how. Outside, the world hadn't slowed down. If anything, it had gotten louder. More cameras, more whispers, more judgment. People didn't just believe the story anymore. They were waiting for it to collapse, for her to collapse. Tử Tiên walked past them without reacting, without responding, her steps steady but her mind unraveling, because no matter how much she tried to stay grounded, one thing kept returning, over and over again. The hesitation. That moment. That 1 second where she didn't fully believe him, and she hated herself for it, but she couldn't erase it. Meanwhile, Jack's phone rang. He answered immediately. "Talk to me." On the other end, his private investigator didn't waste time. "There's something wrong with the report." Jack stood up instantly. "What do you mean?" "It's not just fake. It's too accurate in the wrong places," the voice replied. "Whoever did this had access to personal data. Real data." Jack's expression darkened. "How real?" "Enough to make the lie believable." A pause. Then, "And there's more. The lab that verified it, someone paid them. Quietly." Jack's grip tightened around the phone. "Find out who." "I'm already trying," the investigator said. "But this wasn't done by an outsider." Jack's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," the voice lowered, "this came from someone close." The line went silent, and suddenly, everything shifted. Not just suspicion, direction. Jack hung up slowly, his mind racing. Personal data, access, money, verification. This wasn't random. This wasn't revenge from afar. This was someone who knew him, someone who knew his family, someone who knew exactly where to strike. He turned, slowly, and his gaze landed on one person, his mother. She stood there, unmoving, watching him. "What?" she asked. Jack didn't answer immediately, because the thought itself felt impossible, but it was there now, and it wouldn't leave. "Who did you send the report to?" he asked. Her brows furrowed slightly. "A contact," she said. "Why?" Jack stepped closer. "Who?" "It doesn't matter. It matters now," he cut in. For the first time, something in his tone made her pause, because it wasn't defensive, it was searching, carefully. She exhaled. "Mr. Khan," she said. "He handles sensitive matters." Jack froze. That name. It clicked. Instantly. Too instantly. And that was the problem. Because Mr. Khan wasn't just a contact, he was family. His uncle, the one who had always stayed in the background, the one who never spoke too much, the one who always knew more than he showed. Jack stepped back slightly. "No," he murmured. His mother frowned. "What is it?" But before he could answer, the door opened again, without warning, and this time, it wasn't subtle. A man stepped inside, calm, controlled, smiling just enough. Mr. Khan. "Well," he said casually, looking around the room as if nothing was wrong, "this escalated faster than I expected." Silence fell, heavy, sharp, dangerous. Jack stared at him. "You," he said. Not a question. A realization, Mr. Khan tilted his head slightly. "Took you long enough?" Tử Tiên, who had just stepped back inside, froze at the doorway. Her heart dropped, because suddenly, the truth wasn't distant anymore. It was here, right in front of her. "What did you do?" Jack demanded, his voice low, controlled, but on the edge of breaking. Mr. Khan walked further into the room, unbothered. "I corrected a mistake," he said simply. "What mistake?" He glanced at Tử Tiên, then back at Jack. "You choosing her over everything else." The words hit like a storm. His mother stepped forward. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice no longer calm. Mr. Khan looked at her. "You were supposed to protect the family name," he said, "not let it be diluted." The air shifted, completely. "This isn't protection," Jack said. "This is destruction." Mr. Khan smiled slightly. "Only if you let it be." Tu Tian felt her chest tighten, because in that moment, everything made sense. The precision, the access, the cruelty. It wasn't random. It was intentional, calculated, personal, and worst of all, it came from inside. Her voice came out before she could stop it. "Why me?" she asked. Mr. Khan turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Because you were the easiest way to break him." Silence. Complete. Devastating. Jack stepped forward instantly. "Enough." But it wasn't enough, because the damage had already been done. And now, it was no longer just about proving the truth. It was about facing it, facing who caused it, facing what it broke, and deciding what came next. Tu Tian stood there, unmoving, her eyes no longer filled with doubt, but something else. Clarity. Painful, sharp, real. Because this time, the truth wasn't the problem. The truth was who had taken it from her, and whether she could ever feel safe again, even inside the family.